they discover the elderly weird man, Herbert. Herbert prays to God for the opportunity to sniff Chris's hat. Ew. Miraculously, he gets the chance. But once he does...
What it is, guys, it's your boy BlastphamousHD, and today we are here to do the world's quietest Try Not to Laugh challenge. Now, we're actually here to watch times Chris Griffin's Innocence got him into hilarious trouble, because I have gotten myself into hilarious trouble with my innocence as well, because you all know that I am a born-again virgin again, and therefore can never be slut-shamed again. Unless you bad, y'all can slut-shame me. Let's do this.
Chris Griffin is one of the most innocent characters in Family Guy, a trait that can lead to some of the funniest moments on the show. Let's look at the 10 times Chris's innocence got him into hilarious trouble. Our list starts with Chris getting invited to a birthday party by Barbara. During dinner, he talks about it with his family and tries to get some ideas from them on what gift he should buy Barbara. Chris gets Barbara perfume, but he messes up dearly when he sprays it on her eyes.
Ow, my eyes!
You're beautiful!
Just get away from me, Chris!
Chris's cluelessness is quite amusing. Later, while he's shopping at the store, his bicycle gets stolen. When he goes to the police station to report it, his dad arrives to pick him up. What's funny is that his dad is just as clueless as he is.
Okay, I laughed. I was gonna try to brush past it like I didn't, but I laughed.
After all, there's a saying, like father, like son. Not only does he mistakenly provide the robber with Chris's photo and name, but he also shares Chris's fears. At breakfast, the family is watching the news when they see a report about the same robber escaping from prison. Meanwhile, poor Chris finds himself in deep trouble.
I'm gonna go bang my girlfriend, and then I'm gonna kill Chris Griffin!
Oh man, the family has been relocated by the FBI, and Meg and Peter are upset about the situation, although we know who is really to blame. The place they are living in is dreadful, but Lois is doing her best to keep everyone's spirits up. Peter finally gets a job as a lazy drunk sheriff. While the Griffins are hiding out in a small southern town, Chris makes a new friend named Sam. However, the community does not take kindly to Chris and Sam's friendship. As they're parting ways, Sam kisses Chris, but he feels uncomfortable about being kissed by a boy. Later, he discovers that Sam is actually a girl. Poor Chris completely misses this detail, and when he finally realizes the truth, he becomes very flustered, leading to some awkward yet funny interactions.
You're a girl?
Of course I am.
Oh my god!
Chris, buddy, there were hints. Meanwhile, the FBI has provided the criminal with the Griffin's address. Given how Peter angered the town, there's no hope for extra help from the community. Eventually, the criminal approaches Chris, but the community comes together and saves the day. The family ultimately leaves the town, and sadly, Chris and Sam's relationship comes to an end. Chris finds himself in serious trouble when he develops a crush on his teacher, Mrs. Lockhart. Innocent and unaware, Chris has no idea that Mrs. Lockhart is a manipulative woman who is using his infatuation to orchestrate a murder. While Chris believes he is simply being a good friend, she takes advantage of him for her own sinister plans. Meanwhile,
I love manipulative women.
Miss Clifton has won the lottery and will not be returning to teaching, leaving Chris smitten with his new teacher. His friend Brian has recently landed a job as a teacher as well. Chris's mother, Lois, is furious when she discovers that her son is in love with his teacher, and his sister Meg is utterly disgusted. Concerned for their son, Chris's parents go to the school to warn Mrs. Lockhart and ask her to let Chris down gently. However, instead of heeding their advice, she arranges to meet Chris outside of school. She tells him that she loves him, but in order for them to be together, Chris must kill her husband. When Chris proves too weak to go through with the plan, Mrs. Lockhart takes the matters into her own hands and carries out the deed herself. While doing laundry, Lois finds a note in Chris's pocket outlining his plan to murder Mr. Lockhart. She discovers the body and hides it, unaware that Chris did not
Damn, I'm really trying, I swear to God, yo.
actually kill him. Peter and Lois then confront Chris about the situation.
For God's
God's sake, Chris, you murdered Mr. Lockhart.
What? No, I didn't.
In the end, the news on TV revealed the truth, and Chris's parents apologized. What an episode! In this episode, Stewie invites Brian to place a bet on 2 boxers for Friday night. And as expected, Stewie wins the bet. When Brian fails to pay Stewie on time, the punishment he receives is horrifying and sure to teach him a lesson. Meanwhile, Peter's high school reunion turns into a disastrous mess. However, it ultimately leads to Peter securing a job as an athlete with the New England Patriots. During a dinner at the Griffin household with Mr. Brady, both Lois and Meg find themselves blushing and squealing with joy when Tom Brady tells them they can just call him Tom. Chris then asks Mr. Brady whether he can also call him Tom, demonstrating his cluelessness by squealing at the chance to call Tom Brady by his first name.
He's closer to my age, you cow.
Later, the family watches Peter's commercial on TV. With his new job, Peter becomes overconfident and even creates a victory song for himself. His teammates, growing tired of his attitude, decide to sell his contract to the worst team in London. When Peter wants to quit, Lois, the optimistic one, tries to motivate him by encouraging him to see the bright side and be a positive influence for the team. Although his team quits, Tom Brady praises Peter for showing strength by taking on the Patriots alone. At number 7, Chris forms a friendship with an elderly man named Franz, who is revealed to be a former Nazi. Unaware of Franz's troubling past, Chris defends him when Mr. Herbert attempts to intervene. This situation leads to both awkward and darkly humorous moments. This episode begins with the family feeling concerned about Chris, prompting them to find a hobby for him. As Peter and Chris set out to discover a new interest, they discover the elderly weird man, Herbert. Herbert prays to God for the opportunity to sniff Chris's hat. Ew. Miraculously, he gets the chance. But once he does, things take an unexpected turn. Chris and Peter try using
That was far too loud of a cough. Way too loud.
stamps, but it doesn't work out. Instead, they decide to go to a bar, but Chris is not allowed due to his age. Peter, however, comes out drunk. While they're outside, Chris notices a puppet store and becomes very interested. The owner of the shop, a man named Franz, welcomes him and shares all about puppets. They play with some puppets and Chris enjoys it immensely. As a result, the two become friends. Later, Herbert visits the Griffin home to inform them that Chris is friends with a Nazi member. He tells Lois and Peter about Franz and claims he knows he's a Nazi because he encountered him during the war. The Griffins decide to invite Franz over since they don't believe Herbert's story. The next day, when Chris plans to meet with Franz, Mr. Herbert tries his best to stop him, but Chris is determined. Peter is also at Franz's home to invite him over for dinner. While looking for the bathroom, Chris accidentally stumbles into Franz's Nazi room. Oh man. Franz then decides to kill them and locks them in the basement. The next day, Lois goes looking for them. Peter and Chris work together to escape, and Mr. Herbert sees them. He says he is going to get help. He dresses in his old uniform and sets off to save them himself. The fight that ensues is painfully slow, but ultimately ends with Mr. Herbert winning. He saves them, and Chris is thankful and shows his gratitude, and Mr. Herbert finally gets the hug he's been longing for. Talk about an answered prayer. At number 6. The episode begins with Chris in class, where his schoolmates are teasing him about his shoes. Meanwhile, Stewie and Lois are on their way home. Stewie is in a bad mood until he hears Anne-Marie's music and becomes entranced by her voice. When Lois asks him if he likes Anne-Marie's songs, he replies,
I've never known such happiness.
Yeah. Later that day, Peter and Lois are watching the news when Chris approaches them to ask for new sneakers. They scold him for being ungrateful. Meanwhile, Stewie loses himself to Anne-Marie's music, which has turned into his ultimate addiction. Chris notices his parents' wallet and feels tempted to steal money for his sneakers. However, he finds no cash inside. Instead, he spots his mom's handbag, which contains cash, and feeling guilty, he takes it. Unfortunately for him, Meg catches him in the act.
Busted.
Lois and Peter are at a restaurant when Peter realizes he left his wallet at home. Classic Peter. Never forgets his appetite, always forgets his wallet. He calls his friend to ask him to bring it. Meanwhile, Meg confronts Chris about the money he stole and blackmails him into doing whatever she wants. Brian discovers Stewie listening to Anne Murray and judges him for it. Stewie responds by saying he's going to change Brian's mind about her music. Later, we see that Chris has cleaned Meg's room and completed her homework, yet Meg continues to demand more from him. Stewie puts on a performance of Anne Murray songs for Brian. At the end of the performance, he sheds a tear and tells Stewie that he enjoyed it. Meanwhile, Meg is overworking Chris. When Chris has had enough and tells her she can go on and tell their parents, he decides to run away and stay with Mr. Herbert. We all know how peculiar Mr. Herbert can be. Later, we see Brian and Stewie discussing Anne Murray's songs, but they have a disagreement about their interpretations. The next morning, Lois and Peter find it odd that Chris isn't at breakfast. Meg says nothing about it and insists they shouldn't worry. Meanwhile, Stewie and Brian have gone to visit Anne Murray herself. Stewie feels very disappointed to learn that Anne Murray didn't write her own songs. They were actually written by other people. In his frustration, he goes so far as to try to murder her, forcing her to sing her music. Meanwhile, Meg searches everywhere for Chris but struggles to locate him. Mr. Herbert tells Chris to leave. He has been nothing but trouble in the house. Eventually, Meg apologizes to Chris, and he forgives her.
We broke up!
What an episode that was. A roller coaster of emotions. At number 5, we're visiting a classic episode. The episode begins with Stewie feeling frustrated about the food in the fridge. He decides to confront his parents about it in their bedroom. He finds Lois and Peter making love, and Stewie is traumatized by the situation. Later, we see Chris being scolded by his scout leader, who informs him that he will receive a punishment. The family is then shown watching TV. After the show, Peter and Chris head to the garage. Peter and Chris are working on building a speed machine for the scout race. Chris politely asks Peter what he would think if Chris said he no longer wanted to be a scout.
I'd say, come again? And then I'd laugh because I said come. But thank God that's not the case, huh? You're a scout. And you know what that means? That means I love you.
Poor Chris. He goes up to Meg's room to ask for advice. Meg suggests that he should sweetly tell Peter what he wants, saying it will make him melt like butter and agree. However, Chris's version of being sweet isn't quite sweet at all. It's more like strange. During the scout race, Peter prays to God that his son will win. Instead of helping, Chris creates chaos and ends up being told he's out of the scout program. The reason? He has been in scouting for 2 years and hasn't earned a single badge. Oh man. Peter pleads for another chance for Chris, and the scout leader reluctantly agrees, but only on the condition that Chris earns a badge in 3 days.
3 days? That's tomorrow. We gotta get going.
At dinner, Lois has made jelly for dessert. Meg gives Chris a nod to tell Peter about leaving the Scouts, but Peter doesn't want to hear any of it. Lois tries to offer Peter some advice, but as we know, Peter can be stubborn. The next day, Chris comes home and tells Peter he's out of the Scouts. Frustrated, Peter promises to get him back in, but Chris insists he doesn't want that. Once again, Peter ignores Chris's wishes. Determined, Peter calls the Scout head office and arranges for the family to go to New York. Brian opts not to join them, claiming he's already been to New York, but it seems things aren't going well for him. On the road, Peter struggles with bowel issues. While Peter is in the bathroom, the family explores a casino, and Lois slowly becomes addicted to gambling. Peter overhears Lois saying that everyone in the Indian tribe receives a share of the casino profits. So, he goes to the manager and claims to be Native American. The tribe then tricks Peter into venturing into the wilderness for a spiritual vision. Chris volunteers to accompany him, leaving Lois extremely worried.
Tried to get him to old Yeller himself. Oh boy.
For their safety.
They're dead, you know.
Peter discovers that he has the ability to communicate with trees and eventually finds a spiritual guide. This guide advises him to listen to his son. One day, when Chris wakes up and tries to talk to Peter, he remembers his guide's advice and decides to listen to Chris. Chris expresses his feelings about not wanting to be in Scouts and shares his passion for drawing. He shows Peter his artwork, and Peter tells him how proud he is of him. They share a hug, and they return to tell the others all about their journey. And that's the end of the episode. In Season 2, Episode 11, Carter Banks takes on the role of Brian but nearly forgets all his lines and struggles with acting. It's Peter's birthday and he is blindfolded. While driving the car blindfolded, Lois pleads with him to let her take the wheel. However, Peter has a strong belief about women not driving. Fortunately, he avoids any major accidents along the way. Although he does slam a car, they finally reach their destination. The family surprises Peter with a day at Bob's Funland and Putt-Putt Golf, and all his friends are there too.
Who are you?
I'm the guy whose car you just slammed into.
Lois, you invited everyone!
At Bob's Funland and Putt-Putt Golf, Peter and his friends are having a great time. Meanwhile, Carter Banks is struggling to get into character as Brian. The whole family is enjoying themselves, and Stewie is having fun with his rifle as well. However, Peter and his friends are causing trouble, which prompts the manager to ask them to leave. Instead of apologizing, Peter insults the manager. The manager, who owns the establishment, is an old acquaintance of Peter's from high school.
So what have you done with your life, you jerk?
Later, Peter sits at home feeling down about not having accomplished anything in his life. Lois tries to cheer him up and encourages him to enjoy the rest of his birthday. Chris presents his father with a painting as a birthday gift, but the family doesn't seem to appreciate it much. The next day, Chris reminds Peter to hang the painting on the wall. Peter agrees to take it with him. Someone notices the painting in the window and offers Peter $5,000 for it, which he decides to sell. Oh man. Chris feels upset because he created the painting for his father, but Peter reassures him, saying he didn't even want it, and they received a free trip to New York from the buyer, Antonio Monati, who believes Chris could become famous. Brian informs them about how significant an art dealer Mr. Monati is. When they arrive in New York, they explore the city as a family. Mr. Monati takes Chris under his wing to try to transform him into an artist. He completely changes Chris's image and tells him that he will never see his dad again, claiming that Peter is a pig. Mr. Monati insists that if Chris wants to be a successful artist, he must stop seeing his father. Peter then turns his attention to Meg, hoping to transform her instead and make her famous for him. Peter and Meg brainstorm talents but struggle to come up with anything until they discover Meg's impressive whistling abilities.
Mr. Minotti, I don't feel like painting. I want to see my dad.
Mr. Minotti scolds Chris for it and tells him to keep painting. Meanwhile, Meg quits on Peter, but he tries to persuade her to return, yet she refuses. At Chris's art show, he is delighted to see his parents in attendance. However, when it comes time to display Chris's artwork, it turns out all the paintings are of his father. The audience reacts negatively, hurling insults at the artwork, and Mr. Minotti informs Chris that he is not an artist. Oh man. As they leave New York, Chris apologizes for not being famous, while Meg expresses regret for lacking talent. Peter reassures them, saying it's okay because he has both of them. At that moment, Calvin Klein approaches and insists on having Stewie as a model, declaring that he is a beautiful baby perfect for the face of his new diaper line. Stewie, in turn, enjoys being the model. The family is watching the news when they learn that Charles Yamamoto has never lost a hot dog eating contest. Another contest is scheduled to take place soon. Chris suggests that Peter should enter the contest, but Peter responds that he is watching his figure. He then asks Chris if he eats anything. Chris replies that he eats all the time. Peter suggests that Chris should enter the contest instead, and notes that all they need now is the $50 entry fee. Lois, however, says she isn't going to spend $50 on some contest, so the two of them need to find a different way to get the money. They decide to check out Peter's old belongings to see if they can sell anything for the entry fee. Brian pulls out a Queen's New World album. The album cover is scary, and when Brian shows it to Stewie, he cries out in fear and runs away, thinking it might eat him. As a result, Brian gives Peter $50 for the album.
Here's $50. I'm taking this album.
Oh, wow, check it out, Chris. We got our entry fee for the eating contest.
Peter tells Chris that they need to wake up at dawn to start their training. However, when dawn arrives, Peter is too sleepy to get up when Chris goes to wake him. Stewie also struggles to wake up. His morning alarm isn't very effective as he finds himself next to the scary album. When he falls out of his crib, Brian laughs and tells him that he was just trying to help him wake up. Later, Brian and Stewie head to the store, where Brian buys some scratch-off lottery tickets. Stewie begs for one, and Brian hands him a ticket. To Stewie's surprise, the scratcher reveals the album cover.
Thanks, Carl.
Yeah, you're welcome. That was fun.
Later,
Is it bad that almost scared me?
Stewie goes to his room and discovers a mysterious music box. He plays it with suspicion, but fortunately, nothing scary happens. However, he turns around and sees that his entire wall is painted with the album cover, causing him to scream and yell at Brian. At the contest, all the eaters have 10 minutes to finish their hot dogs. When Peter starts struggling, Chris encourages him, and ultimately, Chris wins the contest, defeating Charles Yamamoto. Peter is incredibly proud of him, but afterward, Chris is in so much pain that Lois scolds Peter for what transpired. She points out that Chris is already overweight and informs him that she has signed him up for fat camp. Chris protests, crying out that he doesn't want to go, but Lois insists it's for his own good.
Please take me home. I don't want to go to fat camp.
Chris points out that Peter is fatter than he is, questioning why Peter doesn't go to fat camp. Lois agrees with Chris and challenges Peter to stay, so they both decide to remain. The next morning, the coach wakes them at dawn, searches their belongings, and doesn't go easy on them. Later that day, Peter shares a story about food with the other campers. Really, Peter? At fat camp? Meanwhile, at home, Stewie contemplates ending his life because of a robot, but is stopped by Brian. Brian comforts him, explaining that it's just an album and nothing more. He then asks for Stewie's forgiveness, and Stewie agrees. At the fat camp, Peter and Chris are struggling. Chris cries out that he's hungry, and Peter decides to lead them into the forest. There, they stumble upon the body of a dead camper, which attracts the attention of the ambulance and other campers. The police begin an investigation
That kid is actually a character from American Dad. I know, right?
and discover that the camper was strangled. Peter mentions that his brother-in-law has a tendency to strangle people and suggests that it could be him, especially since he has a thing for targeting overweight individuals. However, the cop points out that Lois's brother is locked up in an asylum, making it impossible for him to be the culprit. It turns out that Patrick, Lois's brother, has come to visit the Griffins. The policeman Peter and Chris rush home to ensure Patrick doesn't harm anyone. Upon their arrival, they handcuff Patrick, but they soon receive a call informing them that another kid has died at vet camp. They decide to work with Patrick to find the killer, as he has experience with murder. Oh, weird. Through their investigation, Patrick reveals that the killer was specifically targeting Chris.
You dishonored me, Chris Griffin. No one has ever eaten more hot dogs than me. Now you must die.
Yes, it's Charles Yamamoto, and he's choking Chris pretty tightly. Fortunately, Stewie saves the day by showing him the terrifying album, which causes Charles Yamamoto to have a heart attack upon seeing it. Well, a vinyl cover could double as a weapon of mass terror. It turns out that the person who released Patrick was Yamamoto, making it appear as though Patrick had killed Chris. The police wrap up the scene, and in the end, Patrick manages to escape. At number 2. Chris's parents ask him how he did on his science test. He replies that he received a D, which disappoints them. However, they suggest that he might just need a little help. Chris then explains that every time he tries to study, an evil monkey comes out of his closet and scares him. Lois scolds him, telling him that the monkey is not real and that he should forget about it since he is in high school now.
He is too real. I can prove it.
Peter tells Chris to do better on his science test. In another room, Stewie is watching Hannah Montana on TV when the announcer announces that Hannah Montana is going on tour in town and encourages viewers to call in to book tickets. Stewie becomes extremely excited, but just as he's about to call, the announcer reveals that the tickets are sold out. Brian walks in and mocks Stewie for watching Hannah Montana. Stewie initially lies, claiming he's watching it just to make fun of her, but eventually admits that it's his favorite show and that he really wants tickets to the concert. He begs Brian to help him get them, and Brian reluctantly agrees to assist. Meanwhile, Meg enters Chris's room to see if he wants to practice kissing again, which is a bit weird. Chris brushes her off, telling her that he's so busy because he set up a camera yesterday to prove that the evil monkey is real. Does see some strange things, but nothing that confirms the
Never practice kissing your sisters, men. I don't know why, but this doesn't sound like a good idea.
existence of an evil monkey.
All right, it's time to play rough.
Chris creates a trap by leaving monkey seeds by his bed and then knocking on the closet door. He successfully catches the monkey and brings it downstairs for his family to see. The Griffins are bewildered, especially when they learn that the monkey can talk. The monkey asks to be untied so he can explain his situation, but Chris pleads with them not to untie the monkey, claiming he is evil. Despite Chris's warnings, Peter unties the monkey anyway. The monkey explains that he has no place to live because he divorced his wife, who was cheating on him with another monkey. This led him to losing his job and falling into depression, causing him to live in Chris's closet for the past 9 years. Meanwhile, Brian and Stewie sneak into Miley Cyrus's show. Stewie is ecstatic to see Miley, but when she is about to kick them out, Brian lies and says that Stewie has cancer, which quickly softens Miley's attitude towards them. The family remains preoccupied with the monkey and fails to hear Chris's complaints. The next day, Chris comes home to announce that he received an A on his book report. However, he realizes that he didn't write the report. The monkey did it for him. The monkey explains that he simply took Chris's thoughts and put them on paper because he had been listening to Chris talk in his sleep for years. That's less creepy monkey and more plagiarism ghostwriter. Chris appreciates this and thanks the monkey. Meanwhile, Stewie and Miley are enjoying each other's company, sharing their lyrics and singing together on stage. Chris and the monkey become best friends. However, problems arise when Chris takes the monkey to a father and son barbecue instead of Peter, which frustrates Peter greatly. Chris shouts that Peter never takes him anywhere, never helps him with homework, and that Peter doesn't care about him. Only the monkey does. Upset, Chris runs to his room. At breakfast, tensions hang between Chris and Peter. Chris insists that Peter never makes time for him, and Peter retorts that apparently the stupid monkey is a better father than he is. They exchange insults and play pranks on each other. Meanwhile, Brian and Stewie discover that Miley is a robot. In an attempt to prove something, they accidentally program Miley to become violent. Lois and the monkey try to mend the rift between Chris and Peter. While they work on fixing their relationship, Brian and Stewie run by in panic as Miley is wreaking havoc in the city. Miley Cyrus, robot overlord? Guess we should have seen that coming from Wrecking Ball. The monkey attempts to stop her but ends up being grabbed by her and thrown off a building. Peter shoots at Miley, but now the monkey is hanging from the building about to fall. They manage to save him with the airplane. The monkey eventually moves into a new home, and before he leaves, the Griffins all thank him for his help. At number 1, the episode begins with the Griffins at the airport, getting ready to pick up Brian's gay cousin, Jasper. The family is excited to have him visit, as they enjoy having guests. However, Stewie causes chaos when he sneaks into a staff room and takes over for one of the workers. When Jasper finally arrives on his flight, he brings his partner, Ricardo, and the two meet the Griffins.
Ugh, this idiot will fit in with our family as badly as Peter fit in with the Proclaimers.
The next day, Chris arrives at school to hear an announcement about a new gold statue of a monkey, the origins of which are unknown, so that's where our tax dollars went. Well, that or Mayor West's karaoke machine fund. The announcement also reviews extreme budget cutbacks that accompany the statue's unveiling. Alyssa expresses her frustration to Chris about the waste of tax money spent on the gold monkey, and Chris feels excited that Alyssa is talking to him. Later, Jasper takes the family out for dinner and announces that he and Ricardo are getting married. At school, Chris asks Alyssa if she would like to hang out sometime, and she agrees. She invites him to the Young Republicans meeting, and Chris happily accepts the invitation. He goes through the initiation process for the club and gets accepted. Meanwhile, the community protests against the money wasted on the gold monkey statue. Brian decides to let Jasper and Ricardo have their wedding at their house without consulting Lois first. Lois expresses her discomfort with the idea of the wedding taking place in their home. Peter reassures her that it shouldn't matter that Jasper and Ricardo are gay. They deserve to get married. However, as they talk, breaking news interrupts them. The mayor has banned all gay marriages. Jasper is devastated by this news, and Brian vows to help his cousin by changing the mayor's mind. On the other hand, Chris has undergone a transformation, expressing his agreement with the mayor's decision.
Oh, don't give me that young Republican crap, Chris.
Brian starts a petition. Alyssa tells Chris to destroy the petition and she'll let him touch her boobs, because nothing says true love like bribing someone with anatomy lessons. Chris asks Alyssa whether that's a good thing and if he wants it. And Alyssa tells him that he definitely wants it. Lois visits a pastor to seek advice about her struggle to accept two men getting married. Unfortunately, she does not receive any helpful guidance. Afterward, Lois decides to leave with Stewie to stay with her grandma because she doesn't want to sign Brian's petition and does not support gay marriage. Meanwhile, Brian discovers Chris burning the petition. Chris tells him he's doing it so he can finally get to be with a woman. Brian stays up all day collecting another 10,000 signatures for a new petition. He rushes to the mayor's office just before the mayor is about to sign the ban. The mayor tells Brian that he will sign it anyway. And in a moment of desperation, Brian holds a gun to the mayor. The police and news reporters surround them. Lois sees Brian on the news and talks to her parents about the situation. However, she quickly realizes how brainwashed she has been. Lois had a change of heart faster than Peter changes TV channels during commercials. The police decide to send Peter to talk to Brian. Lois also apologizes to Brian and convinces him to come down peacefully. In the end, the mayor decides, due to the distraction caused by Brian's actions, they won't need to sign the gay marriage ban after all. Consequently, Jasper and Ricardo have a beautiful wedding. And that's a wrap on this video. What a load of innocent trouble.
I can't even tell you guys about some of the times my innocence got me in trouble, considering I'm a born-again virgin again. Impossible to slut shame. With that being said, hope you guys enjoyed the video. Make sure to comment, like, and or subscribe to BlastphamousHD Twisms.